Rajat Mitra is a clinical psychologist who has worked with Islamic militants and radicalized youth on one hand, and survivors of mass violence and genocide on the other. He holds a PhD in psychology, is a social entrepreneur, and was given the Ashoka Fellowship for pioneering work in changing the core of the criminal justice system in India. In 2011, Dr. Mitra accepted the UN Public Service Award for Gender Justice, the most prestigious international recognition of excellence in public service. He has been invited all over the troubled countries of Asia to work with victims. They include Hong Kong, 2013, 2014, in Cambodia with second and third generation survivors of genocide, in Philippines with native people on atrocities committed by the army, in Sri Lanka with survivors of ethnic violence and sexual assault, in Burma with prisoners of the military regime, in Thailand with prisoners incarcerated for terrorism, in Nepal with survivors of torture, and of course his work in the Kashmiri refugee camps and the survivors of the Kashmiri Hindu genocide. The many narratives he heard over a 30-year career of providing support for human rights violations and abuses gave him psychological insights into two of the most disturbing issues of our times, as to how do radicalized youth cope with religious indoctrination, and how does psychological trauma of survivors get passed down as narratives from generation to generation. In 2014, while studying at a Harvard program for refugee trauma conducted by Harvard Medical School, Dr. Mitra became aware of the deep link between transgenerational trauma, collective memory, and the effort to preserve them through poem and literature. This, together with his first-hand experience in the refugee camps in Kashmir, led to his recent book, The Infidel Next Door, a fiction to help understand this transgenerational nature of trauma among Kashmiris of Hindu heritage. Let us give Dr. Mitra a warm welcome.
Thank you, my speakers, Amitaji, and all the distinguished guests who have come to here. Is that clear? Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Keep that.
Closer?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. In refugee camps, they usually say like this. So wherever, and that's a universal language. So I also do like this. So you might notice me moving my hands a lot. That is because I work a lot in places where there is no refugee camp available, but people just collect together to hear me. In prisons, in places like refugee camps, they just fill up the corner up to here. So I have to take care of the person here and also, the person at the back. Right? So it's an honor to come here. I've been invited here by many distinguished organizations, and it's an honor to present things over here today. When I made the presentation and I was beginning it, my wife asked me that, are you going to begin where we have started, or are you going to begin elsewhere? I said, why do you ask? She said, every time you begin somewhere else. I said, that's what happens when you are speaking about trauma. You never go in a sequence. You start where you hear. Yesterday, we were at the press club, and I was told that, these are journalists and you have to start. And of all things, just right across, those who are present would know, a baby started crying, loud enough. And I said, at a press club, why is the baby shouting? And my memory went back to Burma, when the most famous human rights defender of Burma, Min Ko Naing, he told me a story that the crying of a child made him alive. He was in prison for a long time, and he was released by the military after being tortured. And he said, no contact, I was in an isolated cell. He had organized a conference which we had gone to. And he says, I thought I was losing my sanity because I was tortured so much. And one day, I could hear a baby cry, and I started crying, and I realized I haven't gone insane as yet. I'm still alive, right? After almost 12 years of solitary imprisonment, and that gave me the feeling to go on, right? So you have stories like that from where you begin, right? And when you speak at a conference, at a seminar, at a discussion on trauma, it is very difficult to stay neutral and clinical. I will not be. It's not possible for me. So please understand that. Just right now, a gentleman came over and asked me, he posed a question, and I thought I would begin with that because it also relates to this. He said, I have three good Kashmiri friends, very good Kashmiri friends, but tell me all what I'm hearing today, I have never heard before. Why is it that I have not heard? Please answer me. So I said, okay, I'll answer that. The answer to that perhaps can be given in a nutshell, and that is that the language of trauma is silence. The language of trauma is not eloquent words, right? People stay silent for months, for years before they start speaking out. I have worked with many assault victims, right? Assault victims become quiet. They don't speak up. For a long time, for example, in giving testimonies in courts, the judges would note that a woman, a victim of sexual assault, would remain quiet. So that meant for the judge that it was consent. Why didn't you shout? Why didn't you scream? Why didn't you do anything, right? It's only now that we know today from researchers that when you are traumatized, you become silent. There's a place called Broca's region over here, and our neuroscientist friend would can elaborate more on that. Researchers show that the Broca's region goes silent when you try recalling the trauma. The electrical activity over there almost becomes zero. So therefore, it is difficult to recall trauma. And what is true of an individual is also true of society, which goes through trauma. They fall silent. Right? So that's one reason why your friends, your others, they have not spoken about trauma. People start speaking about trauma many, many years later. Jewish people started talking about trauma almost after 1 to 2 generations. They didn't start speaking in 1945 when they came out of the Holocaust. They came out much later when there was this famous trial, you might be knowing, when Adolf Eichmann, he was brought and he was punished for that. And that is the time when they felt that there is justice. Similar to when Article 370 has been abrogated, we feel there is justice. We have started speaking. The day it was abrogated, I got calls from the camps where I work. People talking to me, "Aapne sun liya na?" Maine kaha, "Haan, sun liya." Again a call. Everybody understands Hindi over here? Yes. "Aapne sun liya na?" Some people even spoke in Kashmiri, saying that, have you heard? So yes, I have heard, calm down, Yes, I have heard. So I want to speak, right? That was the change that it brought about at an individual level. So you guessed right, yes, I have worked for years in Kashmiri refugee camps, and the stories that I heard from all of you, I have heard many times. But again, when we went to the camps to start working, we did not hear stories. We only had silent groups that were sitting. The stories started emerging much later after we did trauma-related exercises, which gave the people a sense of safety and control. What does trauma do? Trauma takes away two very basic things from us. The sense of safety, that the world is a safe place, right? The second, it takes away a sense of control. So therefore, trauma counseling, trauma therapy is not to do with sharing feelings. Trauma therapy or counseling is to do with getting control over your body, over your environment, and this is the work that we have been doing with survivors all over, especially Kashmiri survivors in the camps, and that is what I'm going to talk about. But before that, I want to tell you how I came there. It was not something that I automatically went one day to the camps and did that. It was a journey. I was a psychologist. I was working on issues of different kinds, of torture, of suicide, just like any psychologist would do, right? And one day the whole thing changed. I will come to that, how it came about. So I have divided my presentation into three parts. The first part is when I talk about what is transgenerational trauma for which we are here. Then I'll talk about the trauma of the Kashmiri Hindus who are there. And then after that, as Anita ji pointed out, that this is also a trauma of pan-India. It is the trauma of Punjab, it is the trauma of Bengal. It's a trauma which many people across India are going through and have started speaking up, right? This is a time for us to speak up. We are speaking up and we are changing the narrative that exists right now in India. Just before I came, there was a journalist from Outlook who called me and said, as a psychologist, I want your opinion on two things. Why are Indians giving a war cry that we have won something? They're talking as if we have won Kashmir in a war, right? They're talking about that we are going to all buy lands in Kashmir, we are going to buy, we are going to go ahead and marry Kashmiri women. A gentleman mentioned that, Kashmiri women are attractive. So why is that Indian men are feeling that way? So I said, okay. So she said, what is your comment about this as a psychologist? Why are Indians feeling this way? Now this is the existing narrative that we have to counter. So I thought to myself, you have asked a wrong person. I'm going to give it back to you, right? So I said, okay, first question first, first answer first. I'm married into a Kashmiri family. My wife, when she married me, she told me that she had lost her rights over her land. My daughter said that when she grew up and understood that I have lost the right over our land. Now when the Article 370 is gone, we feel that we have got our rights back over the land. So it's a human rights issue for me that we have got our rights back, right? Will you write this point of view? Pin drop silence. Yeah, I'll ask my editor. I say, yeah, your editor might tell you no. But I want you to know that for millions and millions of people, this is a human rights issue, right? What you talked about, maybe some people, some in their moments, they may have spoken about it, but this is not the reality. The reality today is that millions and millions of people are feeling that it's a human rights issue for us, and that is what the abrogation of Article 370 is. In the end, when she had heard me, and I talked to her for half an hour, she said, no, I don't think I'll write this article now. Okay, so I said, good, I've stopped you from doing that, right? I don't know whether she wrote it or not, I don't read Outlook, but I know that this is the way we counter the other narrative which has been stronger. So when I speak about Kashmiri Hindus, I speak about Hindu trauma and Hindu transgenerational trauma. I'm talking about a narrative that has begun to emerge. That is what my goal would be today. So this is my journey towards, can you just help me with this, because otherwise after that I'll be doing this. Yeah, next. Okay. I begin with my favorite saying. It's by Bruno Bettelheim, who was there in a concentration camp. He said, what cannot be talked about also cannot be put to rest, and if it is not, the wounds continue to fester from generation to generation. Bruno Bettelheim was a psychiatrist who lived for many years in the United States, and he was one of the pioneers in making people understand the implications of trauma and traumatic research. Next, please. Okay, I do grief work with survivors. And as my friend here pointed out, that there are lucky survivors and there are not. But honestly, I don't find lucky survivors, right? I find survivors carry guilt. Why did I escape? Why did when my friends died? And I think that, when you hear any survivor, when they talk about other survivors, they have carried and they continue to carry that trauma. So when you are a survivor, there is perhaps that distinction of lucky and being unlucky slowly vanishes away. I work with different groups all over Asia, and everywhere when you work with large groups, you see similarities. The similarity is what I will come to, what we call transgenerational trauma next. But before I talk, maybe just let me show it to you. Do people know that there have been many terrorist attacks in Delhi?
Yes, yes.
There was one terrorist attack in Karol Bagh that was in the year 2005, right?
I was there.
You were there? Okay. Now, there were terrorists who were taking bombs in a three-wheeler scooter. Okay? Yeah. They were taking bombs in a three-wheeler scooter. When very luckily for the people around, the car overturned. The scooter overturned. You all know traffic in Delhi, right? Things overturning does not elicit the reactions like Americans do over here. They say, oh my God, wow, right? You know, what happened, right? How did it turn? But in Delhi, if it stops or turns and things fell out, it's very normal. You go and pick it up and collect it, same for all over, right? The bomb exploded there. It did not explode in Gaffer Market where it was being taken. And there was a tree there, it's a people tree. It absorbed all the shrapnels, right? So a lot of people got saved. When we were working there, the people said they made a model of the tree, the children over there, the teenage children. You can see the tree here. You see this? These are the shrapnels. These are some people who are there. But hundreds of people also survived, right? This is the way survivors try to create what they have when they have gone through a trauma. They could not speak to us. They could not tell us what had happened to them in eloquent words. But they made this model. Okay? And you know who took this model? Where it is right now. It's there in the president's house. Right? So it is important to know that people who are traumatized create creative works of art through which they express, and I'll soon come to show you some of the creative works and arts which Kashmiris of Hindu origin in the camps have done, right? This is the children making it. It was their idea, right? And first it was the children who did it, then the women gathered around, then the men gathered around, the men giving advice saying that you do like this, you do like that, right? Then finally the men participated, and when we had the function, the men came forward to say, yes, it was our idea, we did it. So right? We celebrated by going to the zoo, and it was one occasion, you know, we were taking the survivors out, almost few hundred came out, so the Delhi Zoo Authority allowed us to go in and share that. So survivors have their journey, right? And every Kashmiri survivor has had a journey and they're going through it. Next. Okay, this is as a psychologist, I also take notes. This is the bodyguard of Aung Suu Kyi. He's no longer there. He saved Aung Suu Kyi during his student days, but he was so much tortured. Now, before he passed away, he gave his testimony and was writing to me. He's gone. Next. Okay. So this is some of my work which I do, working with traumatized groups across different countries. Next. Yeah, and we were given United Nations Public Service Award for our work. This is me receiving the award from the President of Tanzania. He was invited. And I received it on behalf of India. Let me say this. I did not, you said that I received it. The moment of pride for me was that when it was told that India gets the award from 86 countries out of selected. We were 2011. And it's an emotional moment for us when we receive something on behalf of India. You notice something about that picture? I'm not holding this, right? Why? Because it fell down from my hands. I was so emotional. So he picked it up and he said, "Don't lose it." Right? So I get traumatized too. Yeah. Okay. Next. Okay. What is shared amongst all of them is that the grief that we talk about, it lasts many generations, right? There are multiple ways in which grief is communicated, trauma is communicated. I'll use the word trauma and grief interchangeably. And people, when they have gone through prolonged atrocities like enslavement and torture, trauma is something that is passed on from generation to generation. It is never something that if one generation faces the trauma, it doesn't just stop here. Right? Give an example. I was with my friends, Jewish, they were both Jewish professors. We were going together somewhere and they were closing the house. They started emptying out the fridge. So I said, we are just coming back in a few days, why are you emptying out the fridge? Oh, we always do that. So I said, okay, but why do you do that? Our parents did that too. So I said, okay, but that doesn't answer the question. Just because your parents do that doesn't mean you do it. I don't do most of the things my parents told me to do. Right? So, and I enjoyed it. I think many of us in this room also did. We rebel against and that's how we make our identity. He said, well, my grandparents also did it. So I said, okay, it's going further. So maybe the great-grandparents also did it, and they also, father also did it. Then he said, no, my grandparents did it, and their voice became lower. They were inmates of a concentration camp. So I said, what has that got to do with, whether you keep food or not? No, they were punished if they were to store food. If it was found that someone had stored food, they were punished and killed. So they stopped doing so. My parents stopped doing so. We also have stopped doing so. So I said, okay, but why haven't, were you taught to do so? Were you told specifically that you are not supposed to store food? I said, no, nobody told us, but we picked it up. We learned that this is the way to be, right? Trauma going across generations, right? When I married into the Kashmiri community, one of the things I found was that all Kashmiri communities, festivals, everything was inside the home. It was never outside. So I asked my father-in-law one day, a very religious person, why do you do all your festivals inside? He got very defensive. He said, no, this is the way we always do it. So I asked Nani ji in the family. So she said, हम भी जो है सारा घर के अंदर ही करते हैं, हम बाहर नहीं करते, right? Then I asked a few other people, and they said, we have always done that. And then it came out, why? Out of fear. They said that we have always done that. And it is a sharp contrast when you notice that in the south of India, people celebrate outside. Religious festivals are huge things, right? But in the north of India, in Kashmir, people celebrate inside. And it is not just due to cold, no. Because my father-in-law, who was a mathematician, and his grandfather was known as the mathematician of Kashmir, they were very exact people, and they said, no, there was a time when we did used to go up, we did go outside, but because in the last few centuries we stopped, right? Transgenerational trauma, how trauma is passed on from generation to generation. Next. Okay. Transgenerational trauma is why people carry the memory of atrocities. Research with Maoris, South Africa, Native Americans, blacks and Jews, it all shows that they carry, I should have, the word is African Americans, not blacks. One generation passes on their trauma, their fears to the next through epigenetic transmission, right? It doesn't mean that you have to talk about the trauma. Right? It only means that the trauma, because the way you interact, even if you're silent about issues, they are an issue within your family. So many people in Kashmir who are not talking about it, thinking that, somebody mentioned protecting their children. You will not be able to protect by not talking about it. It's a good idea to talk about it in a systematic manner and get it out of it. Silence will not just keep it to yourself. Trauma is experienced not as an event, that's very important to know, but much afterwards as a memory that won't go away. It resists healing even after centuries. When we were working in the camps, one day we were coming out, and there was, from the Kashmiri refugee camp, this Muthi camp, there was this man who accosted us. He said, why do you come here? He said it in Kashmiri. I can't speak Kashmiri that well, I understand it, right? But I will not try to do so. So he asked us, why do you come here? So we said, we come here to work with people, their symptoms, many people have nightmares, they have this. He asked me that, both of us, was there, that, do you understand, do you know the name of this camp? So I said, yeah, Muthi. He said, no, that is the name given by the government. What is the name, do you know we have given it? So I said, no. He said, we have given this name Aurangzeb's Dream. Right? So I said, that's a very strange name. Aurangzeb's Dream, I mean, to someone like me, a Western trained psychologist, it sounded pretty bizarre. Where does Aurangzeb come in? I remember having read about Aurangzeb in my 8th class textbook. He was some there. Why does he come in here? I went back home, I checked up in the net, and I found that there was a story related to Aurangzeb and Kashmir. Aurangzeb was told that if you convert Kashmir, you will have the whole of India to yourself, change to Islam. That was his told it was. So he asked specifically that convert Kashmir, and whatever you need for that, do it. And the Kashmiri Hindus at that time, in a group of 500, they went to Tegh Bahadur, the 9th Guru, and asked him for support. They said, can you stop it? So Tegh Bahadur went to Aurangzeb and he challenged him. It's something that I have written in my book from the Sikh accounts. Persian accounts don't carry this. So I want to tell you that we researched it and we found that it's not written there. So Aurangzeb was challenged, he felt humiliated, and he beheaded Tegh Bahadur, but he could not convert him. So Kashmir stayed intact, right? We owe it to Tegh Bahadur that he really saved Kashmir at that time. And every year, I, along with many of my Kashmiri Hindu friends, we go and we pay obeisance at Gurdwara Seesganj for the sacrifices he made, right? When we came back, I told that man, I understand why you call it Aurangzeb's Dream. He said, yes. This is the last camp from which the valley, the people ran away, making the valley absolutely free of Hindus. So his dream is realized after 300 years, right? So it told us that how, he was a teacher in a school, how people carry the memory of a trauma inside themselves lasting centuries. They carry it within themselves. And everywhere you meet whether Jewish people or Maori people or wherever in Burma, people describe trauma through generations. That is the nature of transgenerational trauma. It has started coming into prominence only in the last, I would say, since the late 70s. Trauma was not acknowledged. Why? It was not acknowledged because it was a political issue, right? Why did trauma become prominent? It became prominent because in America, like till 1974, in the American Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which was the reference Bible for mental health professionals, there was hardly any mention of trauma. After that, post-traumatic stress was acknowledged. After that, why? Because the soldiers who came back from the war, they started showing symptoms, and the symptoms that they were showing were a national embarrassment for the government. They camped, they went to the Capitol Hill, they spoke to the political leaders saying that please acknowledge our suffering, right? There was one man who got up and said, it's been years right now since I've come back from the war, but the other day there was a tire that burst outside, and I picked up the gun and I was pointing it out. It had happened in the middle of the street. So please understand, and I'm a normal human being. And when scores and scores of soldiers shared about their stories, the government was forced to acknowledge post-traumatic stress, right? That's why it exists today. That's why we are having this seminar. That's why we are talking about it. Trauma is political. And trauma is political in such a way that the personal becomes political. Like what you shared is your personal story. You kept it inside, right? As one of you was saying that I could not share that for a long time. We don't share what is personal. And that's why the trauma remains hidden inside. It does not go out, right? But when it goes out, it immediately becomes political. Because it affects, the fortunes of the political people. The issue becomes, we could not protect our people. Why is it that India does not acknowledge till so far the trauma of Kashmiri people because they had to acknowledge that we failed, that we did not do anything. Why is it that despite so many attempts, we could not get internally displaced person status for Kashmiri Hindus? Because it's a political issue. The government have to acknowledge then that we have completely failed with them, right? In India, and I have worked with trauma, one of the things for many political parties is that there should be no reports of sexual assault just before elections, because whoever has it loses the election straight away, right? I had once investigating a case, the chief minister of Delhi at that time called up and said, is it serious? Right, in the middle of the night, because she was affected that if this case becomes known, she's out, right? So that's the nature of trauma, right? It affects people. So when we talk about our trauma, we amplify it, and not just as victims, but as powerful voices, we become political, and therefore we can change political fortunes. So let's be very clear about that, and I'm very happy today that in India, we are coming forward to talk about our trauma. One post about trauma that I wrote recently, it was about that was Birla Temple, the first temple to be built after 1,000 years. It went viral with 300,000 shares, I was told, the person who did that, right? Because today we are looking into our past, we are trying to understand trauma, right? So the last one I just want to say that trauma defines the meaning and sense of safety and identity. Moving away from that gives us a sense of safety and identity. Okay, I'll come specifically now to the Hindu issues. What caused our trauma? The Islamic invasions, the iconoclasm, the later British rule. They tried to destroy the civilizational continuity of Hindus, right? The word civilizational continuity is very important, that we had a continuity, right? But that continuity was destroyed, that was attempted to be destroyed in many ways, whether by stopping our Sanskrit schools, which you people are doing and people in India are doing. We're trying to bring back Sanskrit, or by destroying different institutions that existed. So the civilization continuity suffered a deep rupture, and we did not know how to do that in the continuity of our daily lives, right? We did not know that if, for example, your daily life is disrupted by such trauma, how do you again integrate it and carry on from there? Our society had to contain the overwhelming trauma and became dissociated. Dissociated means breaking up. Right? Hindu society today finds it difficult to connect to this knowledge buried in layers of traumatic memory within their psyche. That is, in fact, when I speak to many of my Jewish friends, they say, you have so much trauma. And in fact, by studying trauma, we realize that you haven't too. Yet, why is it that you don't talk about it? For years, we have not. Whether either through books or through literature or through discussions. But now we are changing. Today we are talking about trauma, we are talking about trauma through memories, and many of you know that our Prime Minister is often gets harassed for talking about memory. Why is that? Because we are going through a structural change in society, in the hearts of the people. When does memory or trauma become important for a society? When they go through a change. In USA, memory studies became the most important study after 9/11. Anyone aware of that? After 9/11, suddenly there was a plethora of memory studies, which were coming up. Why? Because 9/11 shook America to the core. It was never the same again. The questions were, why does someone sitting so far over there hate us? Why is it that those people are doing this to us? We thought we are immune. We thought that we have a structure that cannot be broken and destroyed. But that sense of safety was destroyed for an entire society. So, when a society gets threatened, destroyed, the society falls back upon its memory to protect itself, right? We talked about Islamic society. Today you see them regressing and going back to their earlier stage because they are feeling threatened. So anytime a society feels threatened, they use memory in order to bring that sense of safety within themselves. If it is the right sense of security, they go ahead. If not, they fall apart. Right? So if you go through healing and reconciliation, you win. If you don't, you start falling apart. For example, in South Africa, when they became independent, they realized that there are millions of people who have been tortured. There are millions of people who have been killed. Now, it became an issue that when we become independent, what do we do with all these cases? There are no courts, there are no judges, all the judges are white, and if we start listening to the people, it will take us around 200 and odd years to deal with all the cases. So how do we do with that? So they decided that the next best option, and it was decided by the intellectual leaders of the family, of the people, was that let us create a commission where people can come and talk about their trauma, and there will be general amnesty given. That doesn't mean that, it means that those who have done wrongs, they are absolved. No. They have done wrongs, it remains a wrong, but victims get a chance to be heard. And that was how healing and reconciliation came about. And when they became independent, the level of violence which they had expected did not happen, right? So talking and acknowledgement is what makes us resolve our trauma. Next. Okay. Extreme knowledge. This is a term from psychology. Extreme knowledge is something that has an unbearable intensity for listeners and readers. Like all of you, what you talked about is extreme knowledge. It is not something that you can have in your daily conversation. Survivors carry extreme knowledge, right? Extreme knowledge is, how do you contain that, right? And people carry this in different ways. I was taking a case history from a Sikh family. As I said, transgenerational traumas from many communities. I asked him in Punjabi कि अपने वो परिवार के बारे में कुछ बताइए, मुझे थोड़ा सा हिस्ट्री लिखना है, आप वो हैं. So he said, right, we are a partition family. So I said, but partition family itself does not mean anything, right? No, just right, we are a partition family, that's it, right? He didn't want to go any further. That word encapsulated their family history. 1 year later, after they were in therapy, they started talking, how they came across, how many people in their family were killed, how many women in their family were sexually assaulted. It started coming out then. It took them time. But before that, they were, for the grandfather, for the whole family, it was a partition, we are a partition family, right? Okay, the extreme knowledge eradicates meaning, diverse structure, and kills certainty. It evokes emotions in the listener that creates a link to this extreme knowledge. Like when my friends have shared that, they created a strong feelings in you. Are you aware of that? Right? We felt affected. It was not a daily conversation that we had. That feeling is something that is evoked. Many people don't want to face that. So when you want to talk about trauma, people want to go away. People don't want to be there because it evokes strong feelings. Yet, this feeling is the most important feeling in the rise and renewal of a society which has gone through difficult times. Jewish people use that very well. I'll tell you a story about Jewish people. I'm close with several Jewish psychologists with whom I have worked over the years. They tell me a story. They said that when Palestine was made, when drawn, the British told the Arabs that you will have that the Jews can be decimated in no time. They have been led to the concentration camp through slaughters. For slaughter, they didn't raise any protest. They just went to gallows and they just passed away. Yeah. So when now we have given them this land, if you attack them, they will not be able to fight and right. So it will be yours. It's just a formality that we are giving because of what they have gone through. Exactly the opposite happened. The Arabs attacked thinking that they will decimate the Jews in no time. What they found was that the way the Jews were fighting, they were the bravest soldiers that they had seen ever. They were puzzled. Where did these people suddenly get so much of energy and stamina to fight? These people with their heads down were led to the slaughterhouses of Hitler. They found that the answer lied in the fact that the Jewish people no longer thought of themselves as individuals. They had got a country, they thought of themselves as a collective. They had a larger Jewish identity to protect, right? That was the whole difference. And When when the Arabs realized that they could not defeat, they tried doing that several times. There have been many wars. Each time they have been defeated, and they know now for sure that if they attack again, they will be defeated. Where does this strength come from? It comes from that collectiveness that they have created within themselves, right? And that collectiveness, if we build within ourselves, knowing what we have gone through over centuries, that will be a source of strength for our community, for our Hindu community, for us to take us forward. That collectiveness is what right now is the need for India right now to take place, to happen. Next. The Hindu society has lived in fear beginning from 11th century till present. This fear is transferred and the fear created a mass amnesia in Hindu society and led to denial of a reality that's debilitating. Next. Yeah. Everyone knows this picture?
Yes.
Yeah. Birla Mandir, we went there as, all of us went there as children.
Yes.
And for our generation, that doesn't mean to say that I'm saying I'm old, right? But there was a children's park over there where there were a lot of elephants and all those structures went there. My father used to teach in the school next door to Birla Mandir, so I used to go there and play. And I'll tell you a story about transgenerational trauma which I heard as a kid, but which stayed with me. There was this white tourists who were fighting with a Indian tour guide. The tour guide was saying, biggest temple, big temple, best temple, and they were white tourists, and they were saying, no, we want to go and see a nice temple. So they say, no, this is the nicest temple, this is the best temple, this is this, how this conversation go on. And the tourists, they had taken out a book, and they were saying, see, built in 1939, right, new temple, we want to see old temple. So, and the guy finally realized that, how they were more in powerful position, so he cannot win. So he said, oh, old temples all gone, no old temples in Delhi. So he said, but why gone? So no masjid, there is this masjid, they all belong to 400, 500 years old, right? Even by Kashmiri gate where you often take me for the puja, there is St. James Church, which is 300 years old, 260 to be exact right now. But the oldest temple in Delhi is only 20, 30 years old. I'm talking of 70s, when this happened. He says, yeah, no old temple. I said, why? Why didn't we build temples when everybody else was building it? He said, we don't talk about it. But sometimes a child's curiosity takes him to a path which he never knows, would go where. I started researching when I became older. I found that the oldest temple in Delhi is Yogmaya temple, and this is just the height of the ceiling, right? And I discovered that we have, there was a farban that the spire of a Hindu temple should not be higher than this, which should not be seen from this distance. It was an edict made by Muslim emperors. So no Hindu built ever a large temple. But you have large temples in the south. If you see, south is full of temples. But north, you will not find this, right? Now why? It was fear. It was a terror, it was transgenerational trauma about building temples. Birla temple broke that. It was built in 1939, right? And very, luckily for us, we had Birlas as our grant givers, one NGO. It was fear. It was a terror, it was transgenerational trauma about building temples. Birla temple broke that. It was built in 1939, right? And very, luckily for us, we had Birlas as our grant givers, one NGO. So one day I got hold of them and I said that, can I speak to the persons who were involved with the so I found one old person and I discovered something very important. He said that 1939 when we built it, there was a sense of nationalism, pride, which was coming in India. And based upon that feeling, the Hindus decided to build a temple after 800, 900 years, almost 900 years, because the last one which was built must have been in the 11th century. So, there was another thing I discovered about it. you know who inaugurated this temple? No less than Mahatma Gandhi. He came to inaugurate it because he was aware of the historicity of what they were doing. But with his conditions that it will not be advertised, it will not be talked about, that we are building a temple after all that, and that all castes and creeds and religions will, come like Gandhi used to, do at that time. He thought that if we talk about how we are becoming resurgent, it might affect Hindu-Muslim or relationships, and it might even affect the freedom movement.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So, of course it did not. I mean, we know that his attempts to bring rapprochement between the communities did not work, right? We all know about that. But this was his philosophy. That's why he did that. Now, this is the story of transgenerational trauma. The fear was finally taken over in 1939 after almost 9 years. Today we have huge temples in Delhi, the Swaminarayan temple, more temples are being built, right? We are getting over our fear, right? Because we know that somewhere we can be feeling more safe, we have our country, we have a sense of nationality. And if we develop a collective, more temples would come out, right? It doesn't mean we become more religious, no. I'm a psychologist. For me, it's not a religious issue. It's an issue to do with courage, with justice, with human rights, right? Okay, next. Okay, I already talked about it. So this is the reason why the Hindu identity never became a collective identity and stayed fragmented. Next. Okay. I'll now talk about the second issue that I very often talk. It's the destruction of Babri Masjid, right? It is often seen as an expression of violence by a group of people, right? So I was talking about this in a group of psychologists in a meeting, and one of them said, but in our country, when Native Americans got around the Dakota line, calling it a sacred space, then we felt that we should go ahead and support them. So if you people go ahead and support a space where you think that your God was born, why is it that it has not led to that kind of support and care that you deserve? That's a good question, right? Then there have been many cases, like even for example, we had a case with the organization with Vedanta. They were trying to build a factory near a hill. The Aborigines and other people gathered around saying that this is a sacred space. Intellectuals of the world got together to say this is their sacred space, nobody should build a factory even if it gives them jobs or any, everything. They stopped it. But then why is it that when we talk about that as a birthplace of Ram and talk about it, it's seen as a communal issue? It's important for us to ask. So Ram Janmabhoomi, in that sense, I feel that it has a similarity to the major trial of history, the Nuremberg trial, where the issue became the annihilation of a race and not the number of Jews killed, right? My friend over here talked about that we need to be accurate with facts and figures. But let me say this, that those who work on genocide, on mass violence, just not rely upon facts, they rely on individual testimony. That is more powerful than, people killed. Yeah. You could have millions of people killed, but that's only a number. What's changed the impression of people of the Second World War? It's a book called The Diary of Anne Frank. Right? Many of you have probably read that, right? That changed more about than the fact that 6 million Jews were, killed. One of my colleagues and friends, Dr. Lipstadt, I don't know if any one of you have heard about her? Okay. She's a Jewish psychologist, and she had written, she went through a major trial some years ago, where she was challenged by somebody called David Irvine, who said that you are trying to tell a lie that the concentration camp happened. It never happened, nobody was killed. Some people must have been, but it never happened. She fought the battle, right? And she proved that no, there were actually concentration camps despite evidence, right? People came forward and said that yes, the testimony proved to be more powerful. But what is very important for us to say is that it is not the numbers that matter. It doesn't matter whether it was 600 people killed or 6,000 or 6 million. What matters is that somebody tried to annihilate our race. Somebody believed that our race is inferior, our people are inferior, and tried to annihilate. That is why the Nuremberg trial became successful. Next. Okay, I have this picture for the trauma-related areas. I have gone and walked around the Ram Janmabhoomi, and I find that at the ground zero, many people carry the testimony of trauma. Yeah, next. Next. Okay. The three major issues for us are iconoclasm, forced conversion, and exile, right? I think we are too familiar with that, so I will not go into it further. Okay. This is something also I have shared, so you can read it and we'll go next. Okay. Yeah, stop. Okay. How did we survive, right? As a psychologist, we have talks about it. So many of my colleagues asked me that if you really had so many invasions, if you really had so many attempts to convert, and today we know about the Joshua project, we know about many ways in which people are trying. How did you survive? We survived. I think the source of strength came from the dynamic images we hold inside. Right? What is dynamic image? My friend, a Swedish psychologist, he asked me that if I were to ask you about your religion, what images come to you? So I said, Shiva doing his dance, energy, entropy, the cosmic energy. They're all very dynamic, deep images that come. He says, have you ever thought about it, that holding on to these dynamic images gives you a strength that holding on to frozen images does not, right? And we stopped there because it was a sensitive conversation, right? But it is important for us to know, and as I talk to many people who find their strength in religion, we find that this has given us the strength to bear the trauma of 1,000 years. Today, we have two Hinduisms emerging. One is the Hinduism of the scriptures, which is one, which are deepest. The second is how Hinduism survived over the last 1,000 years. Its story, the strength, it came from the meditation, the scriptures, which give us a certain images to hold inside, which add to a strength in ourselves, where we learn to control and are not affected by torture on the body. That's very important. The images of Hindu mystics and saints who are being tortured and not giving up the religion, including the children, come to light over here. I was called for the Hindu Memorial Day in Dallas. Hindu Memorial, two words bring memory and religion together. Today, we understand from psychology that memory and religion are almost together. You see, Hindu Memorial, right? We don't memorialize those events that happened as expected, right? We only memorialize those events that we wish were different, right? It's very important to know the quality why we memorialize, right? And I think you know that today we are getting into that stage of memorialization. We are trying to memorialize our past because we realize that it should not have happened that way. For so long we have lived in denial, we did not question it. But now we want to memorialize. The Kashmiri Hindu communities across India want to have memorials. There's a partition memorial, more memorials are come up. Is it good for us? Of course it is. Washington is full of memorials, right? Anyone who comes over here goes to memorial. Vietnam Memorial, Jefferson Memorial, this memorial, right? We need to build memorials to commemorate, to remember things. A society that does not remember gets destroyed. It finishes itself. Yeah. Next. Can we imagine Buddhism without Bodhi tree, Sarnath, and Islam without Kaaba? And could they have survived if this were destroyed or taken away? This is just a question, right? But Sanatana Dharma survived with the destruction of its most sacred spaces and 1,000-odd temples over centuries, right? We survived with the sacred spaces being destroyed. That tells us another aspect of Hinduism that we need to know next. Memory surrounds us and defines us. It doesn't leave us, right? It stays with us. Okay, next. Next. Okay. Two very common images from India I have picked up. Okay. The left one was picked up by my daughter. She was writing a letter. She was writing a project on secularism, right? Okay. Now, have you seen any such picture anywhere else?
No.
Yeah. Have you seen, for example, in USA, two people playing cricket like that? No? With everything is evident. Hindu batsman and a Muslim person defending, right? Do you see pictures like that over here? No, you don't. But you see pictures like that in India, lots of them, right? Why do we have such pictures? Why do we have to show that we are secular? Why do we even have to create such pictures in the first place? Right? Now, suppose I asked in a seminar that if you remove this kid and if you remove this kid, right, just for the sake of it, and you keep the kid in between, will we still call ourselves secular? Okay. It was a meeting of seculars that I was addressing.
No.
What do you think the answer was?
No.
They looked at me as if, they were really angry. How dare you say that, right? But that is the reality, right? We have been secular for thousands of years. We have accommodated everyone. The kid on the right, the kid on the left, right? Whoever their ancestors were came. So many people came. We absorbed it. So why is it that with just a kid in between, we can't call the picture secular? The people looked at me as if they, and the second picture, same, right? We are creating pictures, Hindus are creating pictures like that to show that they are secular. Should we still carry on doing it? We need to stop. Yeah, next. This is something I already talked about, so I'll skip it. Yeah. Memory is becoming an important tool for Hindus right now. And memory is the only tool that man again has against the injustices of history. Like the memory that you all three talked about, and which thousands and thousands of people hold. That is the memory, that is the only tool that we have. History writing was prohibited in India. You could be beheaded for doing so, right? So in that case, the only way in which we can hold what happened in the past is memory. Could they have written all that, what was happened when they were running away? No, they couldn't have done that. But they carry that memory inside themselves, right? The partition people who came during that time, what happened in Bengal, they carry that memory, and today for us it's very important to tabulate that, to draw it, and we need different attempts to do it. I'm part of it, I'm doing so. Yeah, next. Why reopen old wounds, right? Because they were badly closed or never closed at all. Unhealed wounds of a society continue to trouble our conscience for a long time. Journalists who investigated war crimes, right? He's a colleague of mine. We have been work together. I investigate cases too when I'm part of investigating committees, human rights issues. And I can tell you one thing. I was listening to him saying that if you noticed his words, he said, these people came suddenly and killed Girija Tikku, right? If you recall. But do we know the case of Girija Tikku? It was something that was systematic and organized. Her body was cut into pieces. It was somewhere killed, then she was taken away. All this was an organized crime. Mass violence is always an organized crime. Mass violence is never a crime which takes place spontaneously. Those who say that it takes place spontaneously are actually trying to hide history and their crime. I worked as in Gujarat riots, in the violence, after the violence, and we were directed by National Human Rights Commission to go and provide support services. We did that. One of the things that struck is that in Godhra, the crime was organized. The entire burning of the train, the murder of the people, you will not notice the word murder ever there. You will read the word train burning. A train was burnt with 56 pilgrims it caught an electrical fire, right? Okay. The same language used for Kashmiri Hindus, right? There were some violence by militants, and so therefore they ran away. Making the culpability for the ordinary people, what you brought out so poignantly, that it was the ordinary people who did that. You saw someone whom you know and broke your trust, right? But that is carefully hidden, right? I have tried to bring about in my book, and my book is receiving threats, my book is receiving challenges for that reason. I was told by publishers that, why do you want to write about it? I said, it is the truth. He said, okay, maybe it will come out sometime, but if you want your book to sell, then you don't write such things, right? Okay. Well, that is the way the culture to suppress truth exists in our next. Okay. We already talked about it, so we can skip it. Okay. Ayodhya, as I talked about, is a perspective where it was to annihilate the Hindu culture, the Hindu way of life. That is the way we need to see it as a grief reaction of people. What is happening today, unfortunately, with the Supreme Court in our country is that they're trying to see it as a land issue between Hindus and Muslims. No. And in fact, I was giving a talk over there at an academy, and I said we need to see as an annihilation issue. That 500 years ago, they thought to annihilate us. Until unless we see that we are at the end of annihilation, that somebody is trying to annihilate us, we will not wake up. Otherwise, we will see that it's only a land issue, it's this issue, or it's an economic issue. No. It is not any of those issues. It's an issue to do with annihilation. Then we will wake up. Next, please. Okay. History and its reminders. This is something I find as a psychologist very interesting about history. The ordinary people remember even if ordered to forget something. The European historians forgot this, right? They forgot that ordinary people also have their history and they remember it. Children and grandchildren of survivors do not disappear. Okay, so they carry a story. Ordinary people with no background of history but with memory as a tool are trying to correct the wrongs of history. Today, if you see the scene in India, some of you may have heard of General G.D. Bakshi. He's a close friend. He's trying to go into history, right? And he's doing it very effectively, very thoughtfully. We are close friends. We sit together and discuss notes. I have a friend, Manushi Sinha. She goes and is documenting all the destroyed structures across India. She does it out of her own money, out of her own pocket. She's not a historian, right? What is her passion? Her passion is somewhere to go for the truth. It is not coming from the history departments of universities. It is coming from ordinary people, right? And that's the same story everywhere. Ordinary people, they carry a memory, and that memory is in conflict with history all over the world. I think some of you know that when Soviet Union disintegrated, there was no history teaching for some time because they realized that the history has been completely distorted, right? We in India are going through something similar. We need to write our history, the true history, right? And it will come from ordinary people, right? Just go over the last one. Erasing a version of history where perpetrators and victims are on the same footing and do not have much difference. My daughter was writing a history paper on Akbar, okay, and she asked me that, Papa, tell me something, are Akbar and Maharana Pratap almost the same? So I said, no, what makes you say that, right? I was really charged up. I said, what do you mean? I mean, how do you? She says, yeah, but he was the emperor of India and he was a rebel. They were fighting with each other. So I said, no. Do you know, I went and told the whole story. And she said, oh, but if you read it, it seems like it was two people who are at an equal footing fighting with each other. That's our history. We don't discriminate. We don't say who was the oppressor, who was the victim, right? In the process, we are identifying with the oppressor, we are making them neutral and identifying with that. Why do we identify with the people who have oppressed us? Why have we named all the major streets in Delhi after them? It is because we don't discriminate. We don't see that they were our oppressors. And that has happened throughout history. Yeah, we have to change that. Next. I think this was, self-evident. Maybe you can skip it for lack of time. 1 minute? Okay, fine. So I'll skip it. Okay. A man who's warm cannot understand the pain of a man who's cold, right? Often I'm asked, will someone understand our trauma? My answer is no. Let's not even expect it. We have to understand it ourselves. Let us not try to make anyone else understand. If we understand it ourselves, the world will take note. Okay. This is the trauma that we have for Kashmiris of Hindu origin, right? The story of 7 exoduses, the islands of Dal Lake. Everyone familiar with these 3 names? The first 2 I'm sure you would be, but for the first 2 you will find a lot of literature on the internet, not for the third one, for Bhat Mazar. I learned about Bhat Mazar from the narratives of people in the Kashmiri refugee camps, right? They said that this is an island where boats don't stop. Many men that I talked to, they said when we would go by boat, it would not stop there because it was a place where people were taken to be converted. That's the memory that lives in people, right? I have many posts written on this. I invite you to read it next. Okay, this is our work in the camps. And I'll briefly, because I don't have a pointer, I'll have to. This is movement therapy. Trauma affects the rigidity, makes the body rigid. So here you can see the children joining it. They join with great fun. Men watching it, right? Okay. Yeah, and the women are, saying that we will have a separate group. This is another picture, right? It's important to know that the refugee camps have both Sikhs and Hindus. Many people are surprised when I say there are Sikhs there too. There are many Sikhs there. This is our team, up till here. The other are the people in the camp. And this one is where we are telling bedtime stories to the children, right? They stopped telling bedtime stories. And when we started working in the camps, the children said, will you tell us bedtime stories? So you can see that this is what is going on, right? Children don't hear bedtime stories like this, but we made them sit because otherwise it would be impossible to control next. Okay. This is children drawing their homeland. This was taken by our arts therapist. They draw their homeland and it's very poignant. Parents ask us to talk to the children about the homeland. So they said, "Aap log baat karenge? Will you talk?" Humse baat nahi kiya jata. We can't talk about it. So we asked them. They said, "We would like to draw." So they are drawing. And next, this is more violence. This is about a woman who underwent sexual assault and she drew herself. Right? There are 2 women actually. This one and this one. They drew how their life changed. So this is the work that we do. This was a woman who was a victim of sexual assault. A gang, what's called a gang assault, multiple assault, and that was another. So they describe how their lives changed. Next. Destruction of temples in Kashmir over centuries. We all know the one, it's the Matan temple. Right? We were in Matan temple just before 5th August. I had gone over there. What pained us is that they had become picnic spots. When we went, there was a couple taking selfies over there, putting their feet up like this. Right? It had changed. Temples in Kashmir are becoming actually right now picnic spots. The sanctity is going. In fact, it's very eerie to go over there. When we went, we had to write our name, our father's name, our mobile number, our address to enter. And it was just like entering a government office in India. Right? Do we have to really come to a stage where we are entering our names, to enter a temple? Do we have that at any other place? But this is the reality. If we don't stop it in Kashmir, it will happen all over the country. Soon we will have to enter our names, our father's name, mobile number, everything to enter temples. Please, I think let's wake up. Thanks. This is a case of a man we worked with. He described, I shared in the beginning. He was incarcerated, he was kept in a home in Ranawari, a 7-storied house, and he was tortured over there. Next. So this is or work with the camp members. These are some of the post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms that you can see. I'll not go into it. Next. How young girls brought about their issues. They talked about their marriage. Will someone marry us because we belong to a camp? Body image disturbances, self-harm. Lot of, we don't know perhaps, but a lot of girls cut themselves, and this is one of the major issues we have to deal with. Anorexia. Sexual harassment while traveling. They felt it was much, they had to face a lot of it because they were camp girls. Yeah, next. With young boys, there were different issues, lack of role models, sexual identity, body image disturbances. One of the things that was one of the most proud moments for them was when they built a gym for themselves. They were very happy to do that. Yeah. Next. These are some of the issues that they share: terror, rage, denial. You can see, right? Yes, next. Next. This is about Girija Tikku. Yeah, I think if people find it people find it difficult, we can shift to the next one. But I want to just share briefly. I'm not going to talk about the case. I'm not going to talk about Girija ji. I'm going to talk about what effect it had on the people. They said they are telling us not to come back. That was the message. And every massacre that they faced gave this message that you should not come back. That's it. The goal of the massacres was not to kill people. The goal of the massacre was just to say, if you come back, this is what will happen to you. These were our goals, and this is what we achieved to a great extent. I would say around 35% if we measure it statistically in terms of studies. I'm not shown that. Yeah. Next. This is the book that I have written where I have covered some of the themes. It's not an easy book to read, so that's what. But I'm glad to say today that people are reading it, including it's a very important, current, topical book. So I felt important that it is affecting, and it's affecting people to connect to their roots. Many people say that this is their life story. So, finally, may Ma Saraswati guide me and all of us. So with that, I come to an end, and I want to say Dhanyavad. Thank you very much.